The tension in the room was palpable, like the air had been sucked out and replaced with electricity. Lindsey Graham, standing tall at the podium, delivered his usual polished rhetoric, one filled with falsehoods, half-truths, and the kind of political posturing that had earned him a reputation as one of the most divisive figures in American politics. His voice rang out, confident, assured, as if he believed every word he said. He was speaking of facts, asserting that the nation was being misled, that the laws and policies proposed by the opposition were nothing but a recipe for disaster. He spun his narrative, claiming that the government's actions were only fueling division, displacing hard-working Americans, and offering false promises to those who didn't deserve them. His words were designed to inflame, to stir the crowd into applause, but the cracks in his argument were evident to anyone willing to listen. The world was watching, millions of eyes glued to their screens, waiting for the next political showdown. The air was thick with anticipation, as if something big was about to happen. Then, it did. Kamala Harris, calm and composed, rose from her seat. There was no dramatic build-up, no extravagant gesture, just the quiet confidence of someone who had been in this arena long enough to know that truth was more powerful than any distortion. Her voice cut through Graham's speech like a knife. "Senator Graham, with all due respect," she began, her tone measured but firm, "you're not telling the truth. And it's time someone pointed that out." The room went dead silent. Every eye snapped toward her, and the cameras shifted focus, capturing the calm yet undeniable presence she radiated. Graham faltered for a moment, his confidence visibly shaking. Without a flinch, without a hint of hesitation, Kamala Harris dismantled every claim he made, one by one, exposing the fabrications and the distortions, the dangerous lies that had been perpetuated by a system that cared more for power than truth. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd, the pundits, and the millions watching at home held their breath. What came next would change everything. This wasn't just another political debate. This was the moment where the truth would either stand or fall, where the fabric of democracy itself was being tested. The stakes had never been higher. It was about more than policy or partisan divisions, it was about the very essence of what America stood for. The nation was at a crossroads, caught in a battle not just for the future, but for the truth itself. Lindsey Graham had long been a master of misdirection, using his words like weapons, turning the conversation away from the real issues and steering it into the murky waters of fear, division, and falsehoods. His rhetoric was polished, sharp, designed to mislead and manipulate. And it wasn't just happening on this stage, it was happening every day in living rooms across the country. Misinformation had become a currency in American politics, and it was being spent at will. Graham had fed this machine, day after day, with lies that threatened to warp public perception and undermine the trust Americans had in their leaders, in their democracy. But it was worse than that. It wasn't just about false narratives, it was about a deliberate attempt to rewrite history, to erase the truth in favor of a more convenient version of events that served the powerful. It was about a calculated effort to discredit those who dared to challenge the status quo, to silence voices calling for justice and equality. And for Graham, this was nothing new. This was the game he had been playing for years, and he had been winning. That's why Kamala Harris's intervention was so critical. This wasn't just another chance to score political points or win a debate. This was the moment where she would either expose the lie or let it persist, unchecked. The truth had to be defended, not just for the sake of winning the argument, but for the sake of the very trust the American people had in their leaders and institutions. If this misinformation went unchallenged, it wouldn't just damage Graham, it would damage the country, eroding public confidence in the system and in each other. For Harris, this wasn't about the usual back and forth. This was about integrity, about ensuring that the nation's democracy was not defined by a dangerous cycle of deceit. Every word she spoke carried weight. She knew that what she did here would reverberate far beyond this room. If she failed to make the case, if she allowed Graham's distortion of the truth to stand, the consequences could be dire. It could mean more people would fall prey to the same lies, more communities would be divided, more trust in the government would be lost. It could set a dangerous precedent where misinformation reigned and truth became irrelevant. Kamala Harris had seen firsthand the devastating effects of lies, especially on vulnerable communities. She knew the deep scars that misinformation left in its wake, how it could fuel division, breed hate, and lead to policies that harmed the very people who needed help the most. If Harris didn't take a stand now, if she didn't expose Graham for what he was, an architect of deceit, then the damage could be irreversible. The nation was watching, holding its breath. This was no longer just about a political debate. This was about the soul of America, and whether it would continue to be a place where truth mattered, where integrity held weight, or whether it would succumb to the darkness of manipulation and lies. What happened next would leave you speechless. For years, Lindsey Graham had built a reputation as a master manipulator in the political arena. His skill in twisting the truth, shaping narratives, and distorting facts had made him a favorite in the halls of power, a politician adept at speaking in just the right tones to sway the masses. He was a polished performer, able to balance both sides of the aisle with an air of compromise, always looking like he was doing what was best for the country, at least on the surface. But behind that carefully crafted image, behind the smooth-talking and silver-tongued speeches, there was a different story, one of contradictions, of deceit, and of a man willing to sell out his principles for political gain. Graham had long been known for his hardline conservative stances, but it wasn't just his policies that defined him, it was the way he used every opportunity to twist reality to fit his political needs. He wasn't just a politician, he was a strategist, a manipulator of public perception, and one of the leading architects of a new age of misinformation. His ability to take complex issues and reduce them to sound bites that could be easily digested by the masses made him dangerous. He turned facts into weapons, carefully choosing which truths to highlight and which ones to bury. For every reasonable argument his opponents made, Graham had a counternarrative ready, often bending reality to his will. This wasn't just political rhetoric, this was a deliberate strategy to control the narrative, to turn truth into something malleable. And for years, it had worked. He had played both sides of the aisle with remarkable ease, always careful to never reveal too much of his true allegiance. But while he feigned bipartisanship, Graham was busy building alliances with those who shared his willingness to bend the truth in the name of power. His loyalty was never to the truth, it was to the game, to the power he could wield by keeping the people in the dark. Over time, this constant stream of half-truths and outright lies began to take a toll. Graham's narrative wasn't just limited to the Senate chambers, it had spread like wildfire to every corner of the political discourse. His influence had been a cancer, slowly eating away at the integrity of public dialogue. He had convinced millions that his distorted version of the facts was the truth, and the damage was palpable. From undermining climate change science to fabricating stories about immigration, Graham had long been a champion of misinformation. His tactics were insidious. Every time he twisted the truth, he made it more difficult for the public to distinguish fact from fiction, all while furthering his own political ambitions. But Graham's arrogance was his greatest flaw. He believed his political skill made him invincible, untouchable. He reveled in his ability to outmaneuver his opponents, manipulating the media, the public, and his colleagues to get what he wanted. He had become so used to winning, so accustomed to getting away with his lies, that he believed there were no consequences. He was the seasoned politician who had learned to play the system, and for the longest time, it had worked in his favor. To him, the truth was secondary, what mattered was maintaining power. But underneath the arrogance, a darker truth was beginning to emerge. The very principles that Graham had once claimed to uphold, honor, integrity, and a commitment to the people, had been left behind in the pursuit of his own agenda. The facade of the honorable politician had crumbled over the years, replaced by a man willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for the sake of his own success. His lies weren't just political tools, they were the foundation of his career, the very thing that kept him relevant in a world where truth had become an afterthought. The cracks in his armor were beginning to show. Every time he stretched the truth a little further, every time he twisted a fact or manipulated a headline, the public began to see through it. Slowly, but surely, his credibility was eroding. His base, once loyal and unwavering, began to question the narratives he fed them. His colleagues, some of whom had once admired his political savvy, started to grow disillusioned with the man they had once respected. Graham had become too obvious in his deceit, too reliant on the same tired tactics to keep him in power. The realization was dawning, Graham's time was running out. The very strategy that had brought him so much success was now the anchor pulling him down. He had become a walking contradiction, a man who preached values he no longer adhered to, a man who had traded his integrity for influence. And now, with Kamala Harris standing before him, the moment of reckoning had arrived. The lies, the deceit, the manipulation, it was all catching up to him. What once seemed like a surefire path to power was now his undoing. The man who had once been untouchable was about to meet his downfall. And it was about to happen on the national stage, in front of an audience that was more than ready to see through his charade. His arrogance, his manipulation, everything was about to be exposed. Kamala Harris wasn't just the one who would challenge him, she would be the one to bring it all crashing down. Kamala Harris had always been a fighter. It wasn't something that had been handed to her, it was something she had earned, time and time again, through relentless determination and a deep commitment to justice. Her journey wasn't one of privilege, it was one shaped by struggle, resilience, and a firm belief that the truth could, and must, prevail. Born to immigrants, her mother from India, her father from Jamaica, Kamala's story was one of constant navigation between cultures, expectations, and identities. Growing up, she felt the weight of two worlds on her shoulders. In her youth, her family wasn't wealthy, and she knew firsthand what it meant to fight for opportunities others might take for granted. There was no golden path laid out for her, no easy route to success. But she had something far more valuable, an unwavering belief that the system could be made to work for everyone, not just the privileged few. That belief drove her forward through every challenge, every door that was closed in her face, every person who tried to tell her that she wasn't enough, whether it was because of her race, her gender, or her background. Kamala didn't take no for an answer. She fought to carve out a space for herself in the legal world, becoming a prosecutor with a mission. From the courtroom, she witnessed firsthand the deep consequences of lies and corruption. She fought for justice not just for the affluent and powerful, but for the voiceless, for those whose stories were so often erased. She took on the tough cases, the ones that exposed the truth in uncomfortable ways, the cases where exposing corruption meant challenging powerful forces that had long controlled the narrative. She wasn't just serving her community, she was laying the foundation for something much bigger, a commitment to seeing the truth come to light, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just her work as a prosecutor that shaped Kamala Harris, it was her early experiences as a child of immigrants that made her realize how powerful misinformation could be. She saw how stereotypes were weaponized to divide, to label, and to exclude. She watched as families like hers, hard-working, law-abiding people, were painted as outsiders, as the other. She understood that the narrative could be manipulated in ways that hurt people, communities, and entire nations. The fight for justice wasn't just about winning cases, it was about correcting the distorted versions of truth that hurt people every single day. Her career trajectory reflected this deep-seated commitment. After years of serving as San Francisco's district attorney, she was elected California's Attorney General, where she fought tirelessly against corporate corruption, financial fraud, and systemic inequalities that plagued the state. In this role, she wasn't just a legal figurehead, she was an advocate for the people, someone who understood that justice required more than just applying the law, it required challenging the systems of power that twisted it to their advantage. And then, she made the leap to the Senate. There, in the halls of the nation's highest legislative body, Kamala's fire and passion shone brighter than ever. But even as she rose to prominence, she was not immune to the forces of misinformation and political gamesmanship. As she fought for policies that sought to protect the most vulnerable, immigrants, people of color, the poor, she saw how those in power twisted the facts to undermine her efforts, misrepresenting her intentions and feeding lies to the public in order to derail her progress. For Kamala, this wasn't just an abstract political game, it was personal. She knew what it was like to have the truth twisted, to have people believe lies that could destroy lives. As a child, She had seen the devastating effects of misinformation in her community, and as an adult, she saw it destroying the fabric of the country she loved. Each time Graham or others like him manipulated the truth for political gain, it wasn't just a matter of words, it was a matter of people's lives. The policies they pushed could lock people out of opportunities, keep families in fear, and reinforce a system that benefited the few at the expense of the many. Kamala had always been a fighter for justice, but this moment, this debate with Lindsey Graham, was different. It wasn't just about making a political point or scoring a victory for her own party. It was about correcting a narrative that had been twisted for too long. The lies Graham spread weren't just damaging to her policies, they were damaging to the very fabric of America itself. If misinformation could thrive unchecked, if people could be led to believe anything that was convenient, then the truth had no hope of ever reigning supreme. And that, to Kamala, was a line she couldn't allow to be crossed. She knew what was at stake. She had lived through enough moments where the truth was pushed aside in favor of convenience, where people who stood up for what was right were mocked and ridiculed. But she also knew how powerful the truth could be when spoken by the right person. She had seen it change the course of a courtroom, the course of a state, and even the course of a nation. And now, as the tension in the room mounted, she knew this was her moment, not just to take down Lindsey Graham, but to take a stand for the people, for justice, and for truth itself. Her background had prepared her for this fight. Her history of challenging the system, her experience in the courtroom and the Senate, and her unwavering belief in truth and justice all equipped her to face this moment with clarity and determination. She wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for all those who had been silenced by the lies and distortions of people like Graham. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. Kamala Harris was ready. The temperature in the room was rising, and the tension was becoming unbearable. Lindsey Graham's voice grew louder, more agitated, as he doubled down on his claims. His words were laced with venom, carefully crafted to target not just the policies at hand, but Kamala Harris herself. He knew that to win this battle, he had to discredit her, to undermine her credibility and authority. But the more he spoke, the more his rhetoric seemed to fall apart, his arguments weak and riddled with half-truths. You see, Kamala, what you and your party don't understand is that America is fed up with these radical policies. You're blind to the reality that these programs are destroying our way of life. Graham's words shot out like arrows, each one intended to strike a nerve. And your attempts to distort the truth, to rewrite history, well, that's exactly what's wrong with the Democrats today. The audience stirred at his harsh words, a ripple of murmurs spreading across the room. Graham's usual charm was slipping into something more desperate, more aggressive. His tone, once composed, was now full of fury, his face reddening with every word. He was pushing harder, faster, trying to drown out any response before it could take hold. But he wasn't as clever as he thought, his attempt to poison the well with misinformation was becoming increasingly transparent. Kamala Harris, however, remained unshaken. She sat there, calm, composed, every inch the professional. She didn't flinch as Graham's words cut through the air, didn't let his insults rattle her. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes locked on him with laser-sharp focus. It was as if the noise around her had faded into nothing, and the only thing that mattered was the truth. Senator Graham, with all due respect, you're not telling the truth, Harris said, her voice steady and unwavering, cutting through his attack like a knife through silk. You're feeding a narrative that has no basis in fact. You're manipulating the fear of the American people for political gain, and it needs to stop. Her words were precise, deliberate. They weren't shouted or taunted. There was no need. The truth was her weapon, and it was far more powerful than any insult Graham could throw her way. As he flailed, trying to regain control, Harris remained grounded in her calm, her unwavering commitment to the facts. Graham's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, fury building behind them. His next words came faster, sharper, dripping with disdain. You're so wrapped up in your ideals, you can't see the damage you're doing to this country. People are struggling, Kamala. They're scared. And you? You're just making it worse with your lies. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some in the audience exchanged glances, sensing the growing animosity. But Harris didn't bite. She didn't respond to his cheap shots or fall into his trap. Instead, she let his words hang in the air for a moment, her cool demeanor a stark contrast to his growing rage. "Senator, I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to fight for the truth," Harris replied, her voice calm but filled with unshakable authority. "What you're saying is not only wrong, it's dangerous. And if we don't correct the record now, if we let this misinformation stand, we risk misleading an entire generation." The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on her now, waiting for the next move. Harris wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for the millions of Americans who had been misled, who had been made to believe that lies were the truth, who had been manipulated by the very forces that were supposed to protect them. Graham's face twisted in anger as he leaned forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "And who are you to lecture me? You've been part of the problem all along. Your policies have hurt the very people you claim to protect." His voice cracked with rising fury. "You're not fighting for the truth, you're fighting for your own power." But Harris stood tall, unflinching. The contrast between them was stark. Graham's words were filled with venom and frustration, while hers were grounded in clarity and truth. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. In fact, her calmness only seemed to amplify the strength of her position. "If you're so concerned with power, Senator, why don't you take a look at who's been using their platform to spread fear and lies?" she countered, her eyes never leaving his. "The truth is not about power, it's about serving the people. And if you're so afraid of the truth, then you have no business being in public office." The crowd murmured again, and for the first time, Graham seemed to falter. His face flushed, his anger mounting as he tried to regroup. But Harris was already several steps ahead. She was in control, her composure a direct challenge to his out-of-control fury. "If I don't expose this now," Harris thought to herself, "if I don't put an end to his misinformation, then we could be looking at a future where lies continue to dominate the conversation, where truth has no place in our political discourse." The stakes had never been clearer. If she didn't shut down Graham's narrative, if she didn't stand firm in defense of the truth, the consequences would be dire. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was about preserving the integrity of the nation itself. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next exchange, the next truth bomb that would shatter Graham's lies for good. And in that silence, one thing was clear, the battle for truth had only just begun. The room was alive with tension, but the sharpest silence lay between Kamala Harris and Lindsey Graham. He had spent the last few minutes railing against what he saw as the collapse of America under the weight of what he called radical policies. His voice was still raised, his arguments becoming increasingly convoluted, but none of it mattered anymore. Harris's eyes were steady, her posture unshaken. It was as if time had slowed, and in that moment, nothing else existed but the undeniable facts she was about to present. Graham's face was flushed, his voice dripping with disdain. But Kamala wasn't listening to him anymore. She had heard it all before, the same recycled arguments, the same attacks on the people who needed the most help. It wasn't just a debate, it was an opportunity to set the record straight for the entire country. And she was going to take it. The crowd had been on edge, caught in the whirlwind of Graham's accusations, but Kamala knew it was time to change the game. She leaned into the microphone just slightly, her voice a quiet contrast to Graham's booming rhetoric. "Senator, you're mistaken," she began, her tone calm but firm, the weight of each word carrying more authority than Graham's insults ever could. "What you are claiming today is simply false, and it's time to correct the record." There was no drama in her voice, no raised pitch to signal the impending counterattack, just an unwavering confidence in the truth she was about to reveal. Harris wasn't the type to yell or attack for effect, she was here to dismantle Graham's narrative, piece by piece, with undeniable facts. She turned to the audience, her gaze sweeping across the room, making sure everyone knew she was speaking to them, not just Graham. "You say that these policies are destroying America," Harris continued, but the reality is the opposite. Let me be clear, America's greatest strength has always been its ability to adapt, to evolve, and to care for those who need it the most. It's not radical to provide health care to the uninsured, it's not radical to raise the minimum wage for hardworking families, and it's certainly not radical to ensure that every American has access to a quality education. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, each one carrying weight. The room was quiet, the audience hanging on her every syllable. She could see Graham's face tighten, but he didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't the exchange he expected. He was about to lose control of the narrative. Harris turned back to Graham, her eyes locking with his. And as for your accusations about job losses and economic destruction, let's talk about the facts. Under the policies you claim are ruining America, unemployment rates have hit record lows. In fact, the economy added over 10 million jobs in the last year alone. This isn't a guess, Senator. These are numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Hard facts, not fear-mongering rhetoric. The audience shifted in their seats, murmurs starting to spread as they processed the information. Graham's chest tightened. His usual tactic of throwing out vague accusations was losing its potency, and he could feel it. Kamala wasn't just arguing with him, she was showing him the truth he refused to acknowledge. Harris continued, her voice even, measured. And let's talk about your favorite topic, immigration. You say these policies are undermining American security. But do you know what the real threat is? It's the lie you've been selling that immigrants are the problem. The truth is, immigrants contribute billions of dollars to the economy every year. They work jobs that many Americans won't, and they pay taxes that fund programs for the entire country, including your own state. This isn't some opinion, Senator. These are facts from the Department of Homeland Security and the Economic Policy Institute. This is the reality. The audience was rapt. Graham opened his mouth to speak, but Harris wasn't finished. She was on a roll now, her counterattack unstoppable. You claim that the government is failing its people, she said, her eyes narrowing as she locked onto Graham's. But the real failure here is the one that you and your allies have perpetrated for decades, telling the American people that we can't afford to help one another. Telling them that it's radical to care for our communities, to fight for healthcare, to raise wages. You've spent years deflecting, dodging, lying, and now you want to act like it's about saving America. No. It's about protecting the power you've amassed by exploiting fear. The room was still, each word hanging like a heavy weight. Graham was visibly rattled now, his face flushed, his hand gripping the podium. He had no retort. No response. Kamala's words had landed, each one sharp and precise, dismantling his entire argument with ease. She wasn't just pointing out his flaws, she was exposing the entire structure of his lies, laying it bare for the world to see. There's a reason, Senator, Harris continued, her voice now rising slightly in intensity, why your narrative is so easily sold, because it feeds into people's worst fears. But that's not leadership. Leadership is about showing the American people what's possible, not what they should fear. It's about rising above the lies and making a future that's better for all of us. And I won't stand by while you undermine that future. The silence was deafening. Graham, once the aggressor, now stood speechless, his mouth slightly agape. His face was a mixture of disbelief and frustration, but there was no denying it, he had been exposed. His carefully constructed argument, built on falsehoods and manipulation, had been torn apart by the cold, hard truth. Kamala Harris didn't just respond with words, she demolished Graham's entire narrative with one fact after another. The weight of her evidence, the clarity of her message, left Graham with nothing to say. He had no rebuttal, no defense, no way to salvage his argument. The audience held its breath, their eyes fixed on the two of them. Graham's credibility had shattered in an instant. Kamala Harris had not only corrected the record, she had obliterated every single one of Graham's claims with irrefutable evidence. In that moment it was clear, the truth had triumphed, and Graham had been exposed for what he truly was, a man whose lies could no longer hold up in the face of facts. Harris had done what many thought impossible. She had taken down one of the most influential purveyors of misinformation in American politics, not with insults or aggression, but with the undeniable power of truth. And as the silence in the room lingered, the audience knew one thing for certain: the battle for truth had just been won. The moment the debate ended, the ripple effect was immediate and far-reaching. The world had witnessed Kamala Harris's flawless takedown of Lindsey Graham's misinformation campaign, and the aftermath was nothing short of electric. The silence in the room quickly gave way to a flurry of activity, tweets, hashtags, and commentary flooding social media, igniting a firestorm of reactions that would consume the nation for days. Within moments of the debate's conclusion, the hashtag Kamala wins began to trend, its reach growing exponentially. The digital sphere buzzed with fervor, as users from all walks of life, politicians, journalists, celebrities, and ordinary citizens, took to Twitter to express their awe at Harris's performance. The tone was unanimous. This was more than just a political win, it was a statement. It was a triumph of truth over distortion, a victory for integrity in the face of manipulation. This is what leadership looks like. One tweet read, accompanied by a clip of Harris's devastating counterattack. Kamala Harris is the real deal. The message was clear: in a world dominated by political soundbites and manipulated narratives, Harris had set a new standard for what it meant to be a leader. Political commentators, who had long been divided along party lines, found themselves united in their admiration for Harris's calm, calculated response. CNN's senior political analyst tweeted, "Kamala Harris didn't just challenge Graham, she dismantled his entire narrative in real time. This is a turning point in American politics." The ripple effect was felt across networks. On MSNBC, former senators and pundits praised Harris's ability to stay composed under pressure, noting that her handling of Graham's attacks was not just a victory for her, but for the integrity of American political discourse itself. For the first time in a long while, the public had witnessed a moment where the truth had been the ultimate weapon. There were no cheap shots, no misleading half-truths, just facts, well articulated, presented with an unwavering sense of justice. Meanwhile, across the aisle, conservative figures scrambled to respond. Some, who had once been allies of Graham, quietly distanced themselves from his approach, others tried to double down on his arguments, but none could replicate the powerful, fact-based refutation that Harris had delivered. The damage to Graham's credibility was becoming apparent, as more and more members of his own party expressed concern about the fallout. In private messages, Republican strategists admitted that the damage was serious, and that they were facing a new kind of pressure from the public to be more truthful, more transparent. But it wasn't just the political elite who felt the shockwaves. The reaction from the public was equally telling. Ordinary citizens across the country, especially those who had felt the sting of misinformation and divisive rhetoric for years, flooded social media with messages of support. For them, Kamala Harris had become a symbol of hope, of someone who not only had the facts on her side, but the moral courage to stand up to power and speak the truth. In Washington, D.C., local news outlets were already reporting on how Harris's decisive moment had reverberated throughout the political landscape. Kamala Harris shuts down Graham's lies in historic debate moment, one headline read. For many, it wasn't just the quality of her argument that struck a chord, but her delivery. She had done something that few thought possible in such a hyperpartisan climate. She had made the truth undeniably compelling. And in a moment when every word is scrutinized, when every piece of information is twisted to fit a political agenda, this rare instance of clear, honest discourse felt like a breath of fresh air. As the night wore on, even the traditionally conservative news outlets couldn't ignore the power of what had transpired. Fox News ran a segment on the debate, but instead of following the usual line of attack, they found themselves forced to comment on Harris's performance. Kamala Harris took Graham's narrative and turned it upside down, one anchor remarked, their tone surprisingly neutral. She didn't just win the debate, she changed the conversation. By the morning, news outlets across the country were abuzz. In a country where the 24-hour news cycle was dominated by sensationalism, spin, and sensational attacks, Kamala Harris had managed to do what few others could. She had reclaimed the narrative. The debate wasn't about partisan politics anymore, it was about truth. And truth, it seemed, had made a powerful comeback. As the day progressed, the hashtag Kamala wins continued to dominate social media. It wasn't just one group celebrating, it was a nationwide outpouring of support from across the political spectrum. From college students to corporate CEOs, everyone was talking about what had happened in that room, and what it meant for the future. The consensus was clear: Kamala Harris had proven herself as more than just a politician, she had proven herself as a defender of democracy, of truth, and of justice. On the other side of the aisle, Graham's defense grew weaker by the hour. His office issued a statement trying to deflect the criticism, but the damage had been done. The narrative he had so carefully crafted over the years, one of fear, division, and misinformation, was unraveling in front of the world. And in the face of that, there was only one person standing tall: Kamala Harris. By the evening, another wave of responses flooded social media. Celebrities, from Oscar-winning actors to musicians, were posting in support of Harris. "This is the kind of leadership we need more of." One A-list actor tweeted, "Thank you, Kamala, for showing us what it means to fight for the truth." The ripples of that debate, that single moment of truth, were felt everywhere, from the highest offices in Washington to the kitchens of ordinary homes. People were talking about it, reflecting on it, and, in many ways, rethinking their relationship with the truth itself. It was a moment that had shattered the political status quo, a moment where the truth had finally prevailed. And in the days that followed, one thing became clear: Kamala Harris had set a new standard for leadership, one based on facts, courage, and the unwavering belief that integrity would always triumph over fear. Kamala Harris stood at the center of the storm, and in that moment, it wasn't just the political stakes that mattered, it was something far deeper. What she had just done was more than a victory in a debate, it was a statement of unshakable belief in the power of truth, in the resilience of integrity. She didn't just defeat Lindsey Graham, she had illuminated the path forward, not just for herself, but for the entire nation. The room, once thick with tension, now held an air of quiet reflection. The dust had settled, and people across the country began to understand the weight of what had happened. Harris didn't just expose the lies of a powerful figure, she reframed the entire conversation. She made it clear that standing up for what's right was not only possible, but necessary, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. This wasn't about winning a single debate or scoring a political point, it was about something far more profound. It was about preserving the very essence of what America stood for: truth, justice, and accountability. In the aftermath, Harris's message echoed loud and clear: leadership is not about power. It's about dignity. It's about staying true to your values, no matter the cost. The words resonated across the country, transcending political lines. Because, in the end, the truth wasn't partisan. It was universal. And in that moment, Harris became not just a politician, but a symbol of what it meant to stand tall in the face of lies, to fight for what was right when it would have been easier to look the other way. She had spent her entire life fighting for justice, not just in the courtroom or the Senate, but in every arena where truth was under attack. From her early days as a prosecutor to her time as California's Attorney General, Harris had always understood the power of the truth. She knew it wasn't always easy to tell, and it wasn't always popular, but she also knew that without truth, there could be no justice. She had seen firsthand what happened when misinformation went unchallenged, how it destroyed lives, shattered trust, and eroded the very foundations of society. This was why the stakes had always been higher for her. She wasn't just battling Graham's rhetoric, she was fighting for the future of a nation that still believed in the ideals of liberty and equality. What Graham had attempted to do, with his dangerous distortion of facts, wasn't just a betrayal of political ideology, it was a betrayal of the very fabric that held America together, the belief that the truth could withstand the test of time. In her response, Harris had shown the country what true leadership looked like. It wasn't about who could shout the loudest or manipulate the most. It was about the quiet strength of holding on to your integrity, of standing firm even when the odds were stacked against you. Leadership was about making decisions that were difficult, but necessary. It was about speaking truth to power, no matter how much that power tried to fight back. As the world reflected on that moment, one thing became undeniable: Kamala Harris had reminded the nation that truth was stronger than lies. In a world where misinformation could spread like wildfire, where facts were often bent and twisted to serve agendas, she had made it clear that there was still space for honesty, still room for people to rise above the noise and fight for what was right. Her victory wasn't just political, it was moral. It was about proving that integrity could still win, even when it felt like the world was willing to sacrifice it for convenience. Harris's words resonated not just in the halls of the Senate, but in kitchens, living rooms, and classrooms across the country. She had shown Americans that no matter the challenge, no matter how loud the lies became, the truth would always have the final say. This was the lesson that Kamala Harris imparted to the nation: never underestimate the power of truth, and never underestimate the strength of standing up for what is right. It wasn't about winning a battle, it was about winning the long-term fight for justice, for the integrity of the system, and for the future of a country that was still, at its core, built on the ideals of fairness, honesty, and equality. The truth had won, but more than that, it had reminded everyone who watched that they, too, had a role to play in protecting it. This moment wasn't just a reflection of Harris's values, it was a call to action for every single person who cared about the future of their nation. As the days passed, the message only grew stronger. Kamala Harris had set a new standard for leadership, not one based on power, but one rooted in the belief that the truth could guide the way. And that belief would continue to inspire those who dared to fight for what was right, even in the face of the hardest battles. And for the nation, the lesson was clear: truth was not just something to aspire to, it was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Kamala Harris's moment in the debate wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for every American who still believes in the power of truth. In a world where lies are spread faster than facts, where manipulation and division seem to dominate the political landscape, she stood firm and reminded us all that integrity, clarity, and honesty still matter. This wasn't just about exposing one man's misinformation. It was about setting a precedent for what true leadership looks like. It's about taking a stand, even when the odds are stacked against you, and fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. Kamala Harris's actions illuminated something much greater than just a political fight. They showed us that truth will always have the final word if we're brave enough to defend it. But this fight is far from over. We all have a role to play in ensuring that truth, justice, and integrity don't get buried beneath the weight of falsehoods and fear. Every time we speak up, every time we stand firm for the truth, we become part of a larger movement. A movement for justice, for accountability, and for a future where facts and integrity guide the way forward. So, if you believe in the power of truth and justice, don't just watch, be part of the change. Subscribe, share this video, and join us in bringing truth back to the forefront of politics. Because together, we can create a world where integrity and truth aren't just ideals, they're the foundation of everything we do. This is just the beginning. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep fighting for what's right.